What's up, everyone? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick.
I'm Jammin John.
And we have an album review for you. So another release that came out on the 19th of March was the newest release and first full-length on Prosthetic Records from Depths of Hatred. Inheritance. Again, this comes out on Prosthetic Records. They had an EP that came out before on this label, but they have two other releases other than this. This band formed in 2009 in Montreal, Quebec. This is also the debut of their new singer, William Arsenault. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, bud.
Sorry, bud.
Terrible with that. And okay, we have to explain what we heard because this is kind of different for me. I'm not like the biggest deathcore fan anymore.
I'm not either. I used to be.
This is not necessarily the deathcore I thought I was going to hear, because I heard a little bit of the EP that preceded this back in 2018, and they had a different singer back then. It was definitely more straightforward deathcore, and when I think of deathcore, I think of like syncopated chugs, hyper aggressive, big breakdowns.
Yeah.
All the hallmarks of deathcore, but deathcore is sort of evolving these days and including a lot of interesting elements, and this album is different. In fact, I didn't mention a deathcore band until I had gone through 3 or 4 songs in here. This really labors melody. In fact, I would say this is one of the dreariest deathcore albums I've heard. It's very much in the realm of melodic death metal. And we were scratching our heads
Yeah, dude, and
perpetually.
I'm still scratching my head. We were upstairs talking about it after we listened to it, and I'm still not really sure what to say. These guys are kind of in their own category right now.
Melodic deathcore?
Melodicore?
Oh, don't make it into one word.
I don't know.
That's just even more awkward.
I don't know.
Melodic deathcore. I suppose it might be a thing. It's generally not a subgenre that I associate with like a ton of melody. If I do in terms of the core realms, it's more like metalcore. This is still very deathcore, death metal centric, but again, it's melodic death metal. In fact, there's even moments on here that scream kind of melodic death doom. The opening track, Enslaved Through Lineage. I mean, it opens with kind of a deathcore feel, but it really just starts shifting over into melodic death metal territory very quickly.
Yeah, it starts out like genty, but then it gets a little bit of like almost a blackened melody.
It's strange. There's a lot on here. Like the first band I wrote down was Hypocrisy. Not in a million years did I think I'd be writing down Hypocrisy on a deathcore review, but it's there. The melodies have that sort of like dark, foreboding, sort of mellow death sort of feel that you get on a Hypocrisy album. And then on maybe a more modern note, Black Dahlia Murder. But one of the things that really sets this apart, and granted you get a little bit more on Sadistic Trials of this, clean vocals. Clean vocals are all over this. And again, that's not necessarily the biggest trope of deathcore. I know that, with Whitechapel's The Valley, they squeezed in some cleans, and Fit for an Autopsy's last album.
Fit for an Autopsy's last album.
There were a lot of cleans too.
Like the intro of the song, I compared straight away to the song Veil We Wait Together from the Human Abstract.
This is very different in terms of the fact, like, how pronounced these cleans are. First off, I gotta say, the vocalist does a great job in here. This guy has a wide wheelhouse. Not only just the cleans, he's got really good screams, growls. He gets down extra low and has some real gurgly ones. A very, strong delivery. And I like the fact that they didn't load his vocals with a lot of effects.
Really, the cleans are very dry.
Yeah.
There's not a lot going on there at all.
And at first I was kind of like, they could have spiced up. But the more I listened to it, I was like, you know what? Just let them go.
Yeah.
You actually get like a nice kind of raw feel.
And that adds an additional dynamic. Like you can tell we're both kind of confused.
I mean, it's a very different album, and I mean, and maybe it's because I instantly looked at the profile and was like, okay, deathcore. I already know what to expect. Right. I know everything.
Right.
I'm stupid apparently.
Yeah,
I don't.
Because I know I've heard of this band prior to now.
I have.
He said Depths of Hatred, and I was like, oh, I think they're a deathcore band. And then we looked them up, and sure enough, they were pegged with a lot of deathcore bands. And I thought, okay, that's what we're getting into, but that's not what we got. But it's still there.
It is.
It's there. The core vibe is very there.
I mean, and it's strange, like, the atmosphere in this, again, I think of deathcore as hyper-aggressive. Most of this is very melancholy. Sadistic Trials and the next track, Pulsating Rhythm, both open with very doom-laden riffs, and they're kind of isolated and dreary, and I would almost say they're kind of like a deathcore nod to Paradise Lost, which again is another band that I wouldn't associate with this scene at all. But that's what it felt like. There's doom and gloom to this. I mean, honestly, I didn't feel that sort of traditional like deathcore hyper aggressive feel until the title track, which is much later on the album. That one sort of just kind of took the reins and got really aggressive. Didn't really like labor the somber cleans as much. Granted, they are there. But it kind of went into almost aborted territory, and I think that sort of
dude.
like.
And I was really shocked by that point. I was like, man, this is spot on.
And this was weird. Like, all right, listening to this, I feel like there was an adjustment period for us because we were both scratching our heads and looking at each other like, what are we listening to?
Yeah, what am I gonna talk about? Like, and all throughout my notes it says like I like this, but do I? But what's happening?
It's very much like, square peg, round hole. I mean, that was the feeling I got. I'm sure these guys get heaps of respect where they're from because, I mean, they're very talented musicians. That is clear.
Right. And I want to bring that up, too. Like, musically, this is really good. It's very solid. The transitions work well together. The riffs are inventive. The beats are unique. The drums are all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
Very well done. But it's like they didn't really latch on fully. They didn't fully commit to the sound they were going for.
I mean, it's moments of mellow death and moments of deathcore, and I don't think any one song commits to any one subgenre there.
Yeah.
When it comes down to even the breakdowns generally are relatively simple, but what they do is, continually layer the melody on top of that and actually think of like creative riffs to put on top. Like, okay, we have our syncopated part. Keep it relatively simple. Let's throw like a death metal tremolo on there. Let's get a little Morbid Angel-y for a second. Or, a clever vocal passage and maybe sort of bounce back and forth between the cleans and the harsh vocals because you get a lot of that.
The whole back half of this album, I'm talking like the last like 3-4 songs, are when the heft kicks in. Because prior to that, I thought like, man, these guitars, this whole thing is just lacking a bit of heft. But I think that's when they were focusing more on the melodic side of things. The End of Ourselves, though, the beginning of it has this nasty Gojira-like intro. And then it finally hit me at this song as to what I was hearing. Remember Bleeding Through? Bleeding Through.
It's very similar.
The vocals are very similar to that, the delivery, even the song structure and how it goes from melodic to heavy.
And I mean, in terms of like clean vocals and more extreme music, Bleeding Through was a pretty good example of that because, unlike a lot of the metalcore pack, I didn't think they were as accessible. Mm-hmm. They had black metal elements, which everyone was like, I don't know about that. But, this is just such an odd listen, and how they employ cleans is kind of an interesting thing too. Fastidious Imitation is barn burner heavy, like right away. In fact, the opening reminded me of Deathclock. But when you get to the chorus, like literally the cleans almost sound like radio rock clean, and it's not like really bad or anything. It's actually like a real earnest, strong delivery. Like his delivery is still gruff. It's still leather lunged. It doesn't come off too clean, and again, it's not super polished. So. I think that gives it a real human quality. The only thing I think that's kind of overdone in here is maybe like there are synths kind of in the background all the time, but they are in the background. They don't come in the forefront too much and interrupt the music.
Well, and my other kind of, I guess, small complaint would be too, these songs are not long enough. For what they're trying to incorporate into these songs, it cuts off too soon. It very compressed, very just like, okay, we're going to cram all this bullshit into 3-minute songs. They've got the talent, make them longer.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and, if you have, like, a big melodic hook or a big heavy hook, it wouldn't be bad to repeat them. There are parts in here where I thought the melodic breaks could have been extended or been used more as, like, a chorus that repeats more than twice. Mm-hmm. One of the songs that really stood out to me on here was the song Shivers. Honestly, I think it's one of the best constructed songs on here in terms of that ebb and flow, but it keeps the intensity rolling. It continues on from a interlude called Gift of Consciousness, which is actually a pretty solid setup, though I don't like how they mixed it in terms of the break. It should have gone right into it instead of there being a clean break. Because the melodies match up, and it really, really kind of worked to like build up the song. This one brought in almost what I would call blackened elements. There is a melodic tremolo that comes in that reminded me a lot of Dissection. Again, a band I did not think I would be bringing up in a deathcore review.
And even at the gates, the melodic riffing in here too.
100%.
Again,
There's
not something you'd bring up for a deathcore band.
At the Gates is all over this, in fact.
Yep.
One of the best moments on here in terms of like a great tension build and transition is the marching snare build up towards the end. And it builds up to the melodic, big hook at the end. This, honestly, I think is like one of the best uses of the melodic vocals on here because it really builds up to that epic moment and closes really, really strong. This song had an instant impact, and honestly, this was kind of a turning point for me on the album where I was like, all right, I still don't know how to describe this, but
correct.
This is a really, really well-written song, and my God, the hooks are here, and it's a mix of that aggression and melancholy feel that's really all over this. If I was going to say anything negative about this, I would say, all right, the production might be a little too compressed. There's a lot on here where I think if the guitars were allowed to be a little bit more full and beefier, I think it would drive home a lot more heavy.
I will say that even when it does get heavy, it is missing that beef factor, that heft, that kind of punch, and it doesn't really have. It falls a little too thin.
Yeah. And as much as I like the cleans and I like the boldness of the cleans, there are songs that open up with cleans. That's some maybe not deathcore size nuts, but those are fucking metal nuts at least. There might be too many. Metal nuts, yeah. It's a condition. But I think there might be too many. There are cleans on pretty much every single song. There really isn't a song on here that I really remember that didn't have a clean hook on it. And I think it would stand out a little bit more if they kind of pockmarked them. Just have maybe half the album have like big clean choruses in there, because I think they would really stand out, because a lot of the melodies are kind of similar in terms of, the way he sings. And sometimes they don't necessarily fit in terms of like the music behind it. There are moments on here where they're playing almost something very doom-laden, and his delivery is kind of like soulful, bluesy.
Yeah.
Almost, like kind of, but it's that kind of, weird contrast. Like it's two different kinds of depressing and dark.
But at the same time, it still wasn't bad.
Yeah,
that's why this is weird, because I'm not used to hearing. Usually, when I hear stuff like this in songs, usually it's not presented correctly enough for it to be good. Usually, it's like, good try, but that was pretty In this case, it was good.
And they melded it all well. It really, for the most part, it just really interlocks really well. And I don't know, this album, I did not expect it to give me like,
I really didn't.
So much of a fucking fit in terms of like describing it.
Right, I didn't expect to be confused and struggling to find words to say, because normally I have plenty to say about records, but I don't know. I
know I enjoyed it, and that's the main thing I'm going to take away from it. This was a challenging listen. It caught me off guard, and I enjoyed it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and give it 3.5 stars. I really got into this. It took me a little while, because again, this has like a square peg, round hole sort of feel. Like I feel if you approached like deathcore fans with this, with all the clean vocals, they might be a little standoffish. And if you gave this to melodic death metal fans, like, no, this is too deathcore, they might be, kind of on an island. But I know there are other bands that do this. But I don't know. It's such an interesting sound, and I love mellow death. I've been a huge fan of that. And at one point I did love deathcore. And honestly, this kind of latches on to both. And it's just strange. It's a weird mix, but I know I like it, and that's pretty much all I can really say. So, take it, John.
Yeah. So okay. So all right. So I'm gonna give it a 3, but I'm gonna jam this record again.
Yes.
And it might change my rating a little bit more, because I really need to. I feel like this is something I can't just immediately be like, okay, we're gonna write a review, we're gonna rate this, and then this is gonna be it. I feel like this record still hasn't really latched on to me. This kind of reminds me of, when you progress in music styles, and so you leave some things in the dust. You're like, oh man, I haven't gone back to this sound in a while. This sounds like something that I've laid to rest a lot of years ago, but now I'm kind of reopening a door, but I'm not sure what's going on, because I have so much more going on in my palette now as far as musical tastes.
And I mean, we haven't listened to their previous albums, so I mean, I think maybe we might be missing something in terms of the evolution of this band.
Correct. Like, because I know I've heard these. I know I've heard
heard
before.
at least
I know
the
I
EP
have
before
at least the name. Yeah, some songs, and I don't remember it sounding like this. And this just
They didn't.
I don't know, and it's not bad.
No.
I really want to labor that point because I feel like we're not. I feel like we're not doing
There wasn't
it
a
justice.
track on here that I thought was bad at all.
Right. I didn't turn my nose up at this, but I really don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm just going to be stuck there. So it's going to be a 3, but I'm going to have to jam it again because I want to know. Kind of reminds me of how I got into metal. Like, you don't really understand it at first. And so you're like, well, I got to give it a day in court, see if I can understand it. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. That's about as honest as we can be there because that's exactly where we're at.
Yep.
But, I mean, I am going to return to this. It's too interesting not to. So, if you enjoyed this very confusing review and watching us just kind of scramble and try to describe this, make sure to thumbs up this. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We will catch you later.